for Matty. I never wanted to have a kid. I was always afraid that I'd be too selfish to be a good father, and I was scared that having a kid would just overwhelm me and just completely take over my life, and that did not seem appealing to me at all. And when I met my wife, Valerie, we just had this relationship where I started rethinking the way that I looked at things, and all of a sudden this thing that always seemed so terrifying to me seemed like it might be kind of fun. You know, I started thinking about going to baseball games or going on hikes or doing cheesy Hollywood stuff with my, holiday stuff with my kid, and it just seemed kind of warm and inviting, but even so, I never became one of those people who felt like I wanted or needed to have a kid. And when we found out that Valerie was pregnant, we obviously jumped right into it. You know, we did a ton of research, and we found this midwife that we liked, and we came up with a birth plan. We were going to do this hippie water birth at a birth center. And, you know, a typical pregnancy lasts 40 weeks. And my wife had something called preeclampsia, which basically meant that she was allergic to being pregnant. And at 24 weeks and 5 days, my daughter Rain was born via emergency C-section in an effort to keep my wife alive. And that's about 3.5 months too early if you're trying to do math right now. And, you know, I sat in the operating room and I watched the surgeons take my daughter out of my wife and hand her off to this other group of doctors that was anxiously waiting, and they hooked her up to all these machines to keep her alive. And that was the first time I caught this glimpse of her, and she was just so small and fragile. She was just over a pound, and she was just quiet and looked lifeless. And any bit of hope that I was feeling left as they wheeled her out of the OR and took her down to the neonatal intensive care unit. And I remember thinking, how is she possibly going to survive the night? And she did survive the night, and in the morning, Valerie was out of danger, and we started talking to the NICU doctors about the plan for Rain, and they were honest with us. They told us a million things could go wrong, but they were committed to helping her get through this, and they had hoped that if the plan worked, that her recovery would be, you know, steadily trending upwards. It would have good days and bad days, but hopefully it would trend upwards over time. And, you know, before we knew it, Rain was alive for a couple of days, and then a couple of weeks, and then a couple of months, and it seemed like we were starting to get control of the situation. And Valerie and I would do whatever we could do to help. You know, we were there every day for hours and hours at Rain's side, and we would bring snacks for the doctors, and we gave blood, and we decorated Rain's little isolette to make it look less cold and more like home. And I would read to her every day. I read her Call of the Wild and you know, and I read her Tom Sawyer, and I read her Treasure Island, all of which are way less child-friendly than I remember them being when I was a kid. But I really loved being able to sit and read with her. I felt like I was helping her, and we got to share these little moments together, and I felt like I was being a really good dad, and that made me feel really good about myself in this whole situation. And then all of a sudden, Rain developed a lung infection, and everything just went haywire really quickly. You know, they gave her a blood transfusion and antibiotics and steroids and everything they could think of, and nothing was working. She just kept getting sicker and sicker throughout the day. And around midnight, the doctor said, I want to try one more thing. I want to hook her up to this machine that will vibrate her lungs, and it might do nothing, but it might help break up some of the mucus in her lungs, and that could help her fight off this infection. And she said to us, you know, if this doesn't work, we don't have any other ideas. And she told us, you know, we should go home and try and get some rest, because we're not going to know anything until the morning. And I was packing up my things, and I was saying goodbye to Rain, and I just had this realization that this might be the last time that I was going to be able to do this. And I just got hit by this almost overwhelming, wave of guilt, because I thought about all the times in my life that I talked about how I didn't want to have a kid, and I hated myself in that moment. And, you know, it was all so crystal clear. I just wanted more than anything to have one more day with her, and I just needed her to be okay. And I left that hospital without knowing if she was going to live or die. And the next morning we came back and we saw the doctor, and she just looked exhausted and bleary-eyed, and she saw us, and then she smiled, and she just looked so relieved. And she told us, you know, Rain had responded really well to this treatment, and she seemed like she was out of the woods for the moment. And I had this moment where I wanted to puke and poop and laugh and cry and just pass out all at the same time, because I was so relieved. And you know, Rain spent 150 of the most stressful days of my life in the NICU before we were able to take her home. And tomorrow she's going to be 4 years old. And I'm a stay-at-home dad, and it's just, and it's been this amazing, incredibly rewarding experience. But I would be lying if I said it was easy or even enjoyable a lot of the time. And you know, it's been 4 years of doctor's appointments and physical therapy that come with having a kid who was born that early, and that's on top of the very real stress that every parent feels from raising their child. And you know, some days I feel like I'm not going to be able to do it, and I just feel so overwhelmed. And on those days, I just try to remember to take a deep breath, and I pick up a book and I'll start reading to Rain, and it always reminds me that I'm just so lucky to be able to spend another day with this amazing kid that I finally realized that I always wanted and needed. So thank you.